Hello and welcome back to the Radical Moderate. Today's video is a follow-up to our last exploration, the elusive mystery of consciousness, where I kind of describe 4 philosophical ideas about consciousness that are prevalent, and those were panpsychism, dualism, emergentism, as well as idealism. Now, in this video, what I want to do is I want to delve a little bit deeper into emergentism, which is the theory that I personally find most compelling, and also try to explain why. Emergentism generally refers to a rise of complex properties or a set of behaviors from simpler parts that are interacting in some kind of a special way. Now, think about it like how a school of fish swims in a perfectly synchronized set of movements, and how individual ants, for example, or even termites collectively build incredibly complex colonies. Or even how billions of neurons interacting in special patterns creates the phenomenon of the mind controlling the brain, and even perhaps potentially that highest level, consciousness. So emergence is the rise of complexity from simpler parts. And consciousness, by this account, appears to be the highest form of this type of phenomenon, an evolutionary adaptation that allows us to perceive, remember, reason, and also, most importantly, be able to predict. The late philosopher Daniel Dennett highlights this brilliantly with his description of the so-called the McGreedy revolution. What he does is he reminds us that just 10,000 years ago, humans or livestock and pets accounted for less than 1% of the land's vertebrate biomass. Now let's fast forward 10,000 years to today. We dominate the land on Earth, accounting for over 98% of the vertebrate biomass. So we moved from less than 1% to over 98%. And yes, all of those lions, tigers, elephants, snakes, and all of those even birds account for less than 2% of the land vertebrates. Can you believe that? I mean, in fact, over 70% of all of the birds on the planet Earth are currently farmed chickens. Now, a minority of the wild birds and the sparrows and all the crows and stuff that we see, we truly are dominating the earth. And this astonishing shift in a mere 10,000 years showcases the adaptive power of conscious intelligence in predicting, manipulating, and ultimately mastering our environment. Now, it's truly remarkable when we reflect on our gained ability to understand the universe through science, peering 13.8 billion years into the past through our telescopes that are time machines, if you can think of them that way, and then inferring cosmic events billions of years into the future using the laws of physics and through those predictive and analytic powers that we have. Now, our consciousness can also enables sublime experiences, wonder in art and in aesthetics, and also a deep existential questioning that is perpetually present in our psyche. Considering the staggering capability of our brain, it's completely understandable why so many people attribute this capability that we have to the divine, and others who worship the source of mystery in our existence. But how does science, which is the process of pattern recognition that tries to empirically approximate the truth by experimentation, tries to explain the emergence of consciousness from what we perceive as unconscious matter? Well, let's take a quick analogy here to demonstrate this, or how I think about it at least, all right? This illustrates the emergentism, and I'm going to turn to a familiar metaphor, which is that of a flame of a candle. We've all seen and experienced, we all know what a candle is, and throughout history, poets like Jalaluddin Rumi have compared a candle's flame or light to the human spirit, and also putting out the flame to be kind of our eventual death and demise. And in this context, I'm going to use the flame to symbolize consciousness. Interestingly, and it's something you may not know, but for most of human history, the workings of a candle were entirely mysterious to us. It was almost magical. Ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle thought that fire was a fundamental element of nature, something like the dualistic perspective. Only about 100 years ago did a chemist, Antoine Lavoisier, unravel this mystery. And what Lavoisier did is he discovered that the flame emerges through oxidation. Oxygen molecules interacting with the fuel vapors traveling through capillary reaction, combusting into a visible flame that hovers above as long as the fuel source continues. And just as the flame itself emerges from a complex set of thermodynamic reactions and turbulent chemical actions that are invisible to our naked eye, consciousness may also arise from a complex biochemical and physical interactions within our neural networks. Now, in a candle, the wick itself is not burning, it's only acting as a conduit to allow fuel vapors to oxidize and burn. Similarly, one could say that consciousness isn't any single neuron, but an emergent property of billions of interconnected neurons in specific circuitry, processing information and giving rise to a process of self-reflection. Now, I know it's hard to imagine, but this is almost like a piece of software, right? The software arises as a disembodied causal pattern and as a consequence of electrical circuits in the computer's hardware. The byproduct is the functions that we achieve as software and what we can perceive in our computer. And as long as this combination of energy and patterns creating causal interactions continues for the software, just like the fuel vapors feeding the flame, consciousness remains. Now, interrupt this flow and it extinguishes, akin to the flame going out when deprived of wax vapors or fuel, for example. Now, a curious parallel to this analogy is temporary states of unconsciousness, such as your non-REM sleep or anesthesia. These temporary states would probably follow in our analogy to be something like the trick candle, which is extinguishing momentarily but capable of reigniting when the energy flow restores. Now, permanent interruption of the energy flow is what terminates ignition for good. And in our body, that is essentially death. Okay, this is my personal take on emergentism. And keep in mind again that I'm not a professional academic in this specific field. I'm just a curious person integrating information with my own experiences. Now, speaking of integration, I've kind of ran into 4 major scientific theories, all branching from emergentism, that further try to elaborate some of the details of how consciousness emerges and functions. These are all pretty abstract, so hang in there with me. These 4 theories are global workspace theory, integrated information theory, attention schema theory, and the higher order thought theory. So the global workspace theory that was proposed by Bernard Bars likens consciousness to kind of a spotlight illuminating specific brain activities, and it's also enabling coherent integration of information as a result of that. So different modules in the brain are competing to send information, and this workspace essentially chooses what needs to get the attention, and that becomes consciousness. The next one, which is integrated information theory, which was developed by Giulio Tononi, suggests that consciousness arises from the integration and differentiation of information across neural networks. The richer this integration, the greater the consciousness. They also have a specific value of consciousness ascribed to different material things, which is called phi, and that is the symbol of the degree of consciousness presence in a given complex system. The next one's the attention schema theory, which was proposed originally by Michael Graziano, and it argues that consciousness is essentially the brain's model or schema of attention itself, helping us control and predict our own cognitive processes. And here, attention is very important. Attention is important in almost all of these theories, but particularly in this one. Last but not least is the higher order thought theory, which was championed by philosophers like David Rosenthal. And what it does, it claims that consciousness arises from kind of thoughts about thoughts. It's our brain reflecting on its own mental states. It's a form of a loop, as many other theories have pointed out. Now, each of these theories provides some kind of a different insight into emergentism, but all of them, they basically converge on the idea that consciousness is not a mystical essence, but rather an emergent complex phenomenon arising naturally from simpler interactions between neurons and modules in our brain. Now, in my personal opinion, it's very possible that these theories are not mutually exclusive and may each describe an aspect of consciousness. Now, speaking of Rumi a little bit earlier on, he does have this story as a poem in his book, The Masnavi, where he kind of writes about a group of people in a dark room trying to describe an elephant, each person touching a part and trying to describe the whole based on that part. Now, everybody could be right, but none of them are actually describing the full elephant, but parts of it. Now, what do you guys think? Does emergentism really resonate with you, or do you find some other explanation more convincing? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments below. Thanks again for joining me on The Radical Moderate, where we explore and also integrate ideas to build big picture thinking. Until next time, stay curious and question everything. I'll see you in the next video.